Hi and welcome to Mark's Motivational Podcast, another Authors Tuesday, the first one of 2025. So today I'm delighted to be joined by another great guest author from Wales, Paul Leyshon.
Yeah, that's
Leyshon, yeah.
correct.
So Paul, thanks a lot for coming on the show. It's great to meet you.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much. So we'll probably start off the show if you want to tell the listeners and the people watching on YouTube a little bit about yourself and how your journey started as an author would be a great start, please.
Sure. Well, for the last 20 years plus, I've been a producer, director, television producer, director. I guess the author story starts many, many years ago in 1990 when I was part of a group in my primary school that won the Welsh National Book Quiz. And as part of that, you had to read a few books, do a drama, do a discussion group, and we went a trip to Amsterdam. So that's kind of where the interest in reading started. I kind of parked that, to be honest, and I've worked as a sports journalist, I've worked as a TV director, and during lockdown, when I had a bit of spare time, I decided, you know what, I feel like writing a book. Took a furlough payment. I just thought, well, make the most of it. When's the government going to pay you to write a book? So, excuse me. Yeah, had a bash at it, and it's doing well.
Great stuff, Paul. It sounds great. Thanks so much for sharing it. And where did your early fascination with history start?
Um, well, I was interested in history in school. I had two very good history teachers.
Yeah,
Um, I had a little bit of an obsession when I was younger with, and we'll come on to it because it's a big part of the novel, with where the train station would have been in my local town.
hmm,
My mother had lived on a road called Railway Terrace.
yeah,
Bizarrely, the road sign was still there, the houses weren't.
mm,
I was obsessed with the fact that there was a station hotel, but there wasn't a train line. So I was always intrigued by little bits of history like that.
yeah,
And then eventually I ended up in television. I make shows like Antiques Road Trip, Bargain Hunt, done a lot of Welsh language history shows on S4C in Wales. So it's something that was there as a child, nurtured as I grew up, and as I entered TV, it was an easy genre to fall into, really.
right, yeah. Wow, really, really impressive. And can you tell us about your childhood memories shaped your passion for storytelling, like you explained in your bio you sent me there?
Yeah, sure. So I read a lot when I was younger. I think, I mean, our generation, I'm assuming we're a similar age. I,
Yeah,
I think we're a different generation. I think we were brought up on storytelling when we were younger. I mean, we didn't
yeah,
have tech,
yeah.
did we?
No,
So, if you were staying over a mate's house, you tend to share ghost stories around a campfire or when you were
yeah.
camping. I
Hmm.
think that sort of that sharing orally of stories, that reading to each other. I think that was a big thing of being younger. I think when you went out on parties when you were younger, maybe somebody's parents would do a little ghost story or do a little history tour for you.
Yeah,
Um, I think that's lost these days.
yeah,
Everyone's
yeah.
lost tech these days. So I think we're from a generation where storytelling was a big thing as a
Hmm.
kid.
Yeah,
Um, when I was younger, we had four channels, which became five. Um, when I had a portable TV, I started watching sort of ghost stories that were on BBC Two on a Christmas Eve. I started watching, I don't know if you remember all the Quatermass films and things that
yeah,
were
yeah.
shown late at night on Channel 4. And that sort of got me into sci-fi, dystopian stuff,
Mm.
um, fiction, and then I think over the years that kind of interest in sci-fi time travel has sort of fused with an interest in history. Then,
So you'd be a big fan of Philip K. Dick, then his work is great, isn't it?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
but I'm a fan.
yeah,
I'm kind of a fan of every. I've not really got a particular genre that I'm
right, yeah.
particularly
Mm.
into, and to be honest, I kind of lost that interest in reading over the years, really. And
Yeah.
it's only as I've done little projects,
Mm.
particularly when it's come to history shows, where you're allowed to make a sort of a 5-minute film on anything that you want. That I've kind of got back into that
Right.
interest really. I've been a jack of all trades across the years, but
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
recent years I've got back into my sci-fi, my history, and my dystopian stuff.
Great stuff. Yeah, I love the aspect of you're talking about language because over here I love the Irish language. So would you talk a little bit about that? Like it's promotion of the language, really, is it in with your TV show? Is it, or could you maybe tell us a little bit about that, please?
Well, I was brought up first language
Yeah,
Welsh,
yeah, great.
so
Yeah,
I guess like having an Irish background, you're brought up on Welsh folklore and
yeah,
storytelling,
hmm,
and that your the culture of your country is sort of intertwined with the history, and
yeah, yeah,
you're brought up on old
mm,
stories. We had the Mabinogion. I guess you have old Gaelic stories and things. So
yeah,
that's kind of part of your DNA when you're brought up in Wales.
yeah, yeah.
Spoke Welsh. My first 10 years as a TV director was working in Welsh television.
Wow.
Um, so I think you're more inclined to get into that kind of passion for
Mm,
Gaelic history and for maybe folklore,
mm.
be it Irish or Scottish or English or Welsh.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, yeah. That must be really exciting work. Like, nice career there you have with the TV. It must be an exciting work.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
The beauty of it. I mean, I'm from a generation where there was a lot, well, not a lot of money, but there was more money in television when
yeah,
I came into it as a
yeah,
youngster.
yeah,
You'd have the time to explore
mm,
a lot of places, especially history,
mm,
historical places. So
yeah,
there'd be that time to walk around, take places in,
mm,
read a bit up on where you're filming, and just develop that more. TV now it's very you rush in, you get something done, you become an expert on something, and you leave
yeah,
it. Whereas back in the day, you'd have more time to sort of ingest information, speak to people,
mm,
and learn about the area where you're filming.
yeah,
I filmed all around the UK and Ireland, and
mm,
part of the pleasure is learning stories,
yeah,
meeting
yeah,
people,
mm,
um, and particularly, my interest in history, and I've developed a little bit of a weird history, a weird interest in ghosts and things.
yeah, yeah,
Um, Historic buildings and ghost stories go hand in hand. The older the building, there's usually some sort of interesting
mm.
story that goes with it.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, that's thanks a lot for sharing. That's brilliant. And why do you think 34 years to become an author? Could you explain that? Like, it took you a while. Yeah,
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 I don't know, to be honest. I mean, I've always
yeah,
had that passion for
mm,
reading.
yeah,
Um, I guess, it's a different genre, it's a
yeah,
different discipline. I went into television. You do write scripts. It is reading, it is writing, it is editing,
yeah,
it is rewriting. It's the same process as an author
mm,
would go through. You're writing light entertainment and fact entertainment. I guess the difference is there's nothing. Um, yes, it's creative, but you're not creating your own stories. So
yeah,
I
yeah,
I guess over the years, like maybe there's a frustrated part of me that's wanted to get into drama
right,
and creating fictional content, and I guess lockdown just brought that time to maybe rethink, maybe reevaluate. I'd written things, um, dramas for TV that I'd pitched and hadn't really been that successful. So when it came to having that amount of time on our hands, and I think we've forgotten about lockdown, really, haven't we? I think when you
yeah.
think back to it, you
I know.
realize
Yeah,
how much
yeah,
time we had. And
hmm,
I think when I was given that time, I thought, okay, what's the change of direction I want to take? And I thought, well, I've unsuccessfully written things for TV.
mm,
So do you know what? I'll have a bash at writing a novel. And I guess in recent years, it's become easier to self-publish.
Yeah,
to
yeah.
go down that route. And it's just easier to have, your control over things then.
Oh, of course, I agree with you 100% there. Yeah, I've self-published myself, so I'm down your road as well. Great, yeah, it's great idea for people that are starting out. And you want to talk a bit about your novel, Johnny Jones and Ghost Train history. Can you just tell listeners a little bit about that as well, please, and the people
Sure, no
watching?
problem.
Yeah,
I'll
and you
just
have
pull
it
the
there.
book
Brilliant. Yeah, you
up
have
for
it there.
you.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So the book is called Johnny Jones and the Ghost Train.
yeah,
It is a paranormal fantasy time traveling adventure for middle graders. So I'd say between the age of 8 and 13. I've sort of touched on the premise. So I was obsessed with this spooky path in the woods when I was a kid, which turned out to be an abandoned beaching line. So the premise of this story is three friends are walking down a spooky path in the woods.
mm,
They hear the sound of a train where they shouldn't really hear the sound of a train. It turns out to be a ghost train. They
yeah.
jump on the ghost train and it takes them to a paranormal version of the past where they have to become ghost fighters and they have to fight the ghosts of history. So they have to fight 1780s ghost pirates in Cornwall. They have to fight plague ghosts in 1665 London. They have to fight World War II ghosts. So it's being described by others as kind of like Harry Potter, but with ghosts. So rather than being a wizard school, they have to join an underground ghost fighting military school called the Resistance. So it's fantasy, it's historical fiction, it's adventure, it's time travel, and hopefully it's one of a series of a number of books.
Great stuff. Yeah, because I love the illustrations there. You want to show it again there?
Sure.
Did you do the illustrations yourself? Did you get an artist or?
No, so I got an artist in
Yeah,
America
right.
to
Yeah.
to put that together for me.
Mm,
Um, yeah, and she did a really good job of it. I go into schools at the moment, and
yeah.
I think it's that skill of wanting to tell you what the genre is without giving
Mm,
um too much away. So I'm pretty happy with it.
right. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
I was looking at I read a few books by Phil Hicks, who writes the Evelyn Jones series. That's for
Right.
for younger children.
Yeah.
Um, so I kind of liked the look of his covers, and then I looked at
Mm,
a few other covers, and I sort of drew inspiration from a few middle grade books that were on the market.
right. Yeah, because it sounds like to me like it's kind of educational as well for kids. That like for the history element of it as well.
It is,
Is
yeah.
yeah.
So I spent my first 10 years directing children's television.
Right.
So the
Yeah.
main
Yeah.
characters are 11. I've worked a lot with children that age. And
Mm,
then the last 10 years of my career, I've made a lot of history TV.
yeah.
So they went hand in hand, really. It was a case of
Brilliant.
food
Yeah.
in both genres. So
Mm,
I dive into factual history.
yeah.
So my 1780s pirates are real smugglers and pirates that
Right.
would have ruled the waves in Cornwall.
Mm,
People like the Carter brothers, Crewel Coppinger.
mm,
My play ghosts are real people in 1665 London. Um, I have a ghost called Annie. She's a girl that fell into the Seine in Paris in the 1880s. I could tell you that story actually. Um, and then with more modern history, with World War II and things, you've got to be a lot more sensitive. So
yeah.
they tend to be sort of faceless aeroplane pilots, and you don't when you're dealing with history that's so so recent. You've got to be a bit more careful turning
Yes.
those
Yeah.
characters into ghosts.
Yeah, no, it sounds really good. Sounds amazing. Yeah, looking forward to getting a copy for my kids. Yeah, that's great stuff. And
Mm.
would you want to? You touched on it earlier on, but winning the Welsh book quiz as a child. Would you talk about that, please, for a moment, please?
Yeah, that was really enjoyable. So
Yeah,
at the time, I'm not sure whether it happens now. So every school in Wales would have had the opportunity to take part. You'd read about 4 or 5 books.
yeah,
There'd be a team of 4 or 5 of us.
mm,
You would discuss 4 or 5 books between you. You'd also perform a drama based on one of the books, and then there'd be a national final. And we won the national final. My school was Ysgol Pontybrenin in Gorseinon. It was a Welsh school in Kingsbridge. Um, and we won a trip to Amsterdam and we met a Dutch author out there. We went to Anne Frank's house because I think we would have read Anne Frank's diary in
Oh
school at
yeah,
some point
very good.
as
Yeah,
well.
yeah,
And it was a great experience. And then bizarrely, one of the books we read was a book called Kai Jones Agesgen y Diafol, which is Kai Jones and the Devil's Bones.
yeah.
And somehow I've kept that name and I've used Kai Jones, the name, as the name of one of the characters
Seen that?
in
Yeah,
my
yeah,
book. And it's that weird thing. I mean, you know it as an author. You could grab these little bits from your past
yeah,
and borrow these names and borrow these things that you've done in life and put them into your novel.
yeah. No, that's great. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Congratulations. That's brilliant. And you met Dr. John Davies. You mentioned in your bio as well. When that working with a historian, you worked with a historian like Dr. John Davies.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Well, the beauty of that, so Dr. John Davis wrote funny enough, I've got it here actually. So,
yeah,
he's passed away now, but he was kind of the expert on Welsh history.
yeah.
Um, and he was a professor of history, and he wrote a book called The 100 Places to See in Wales Before You Die.
Okay,
And it
yeah,
got turned into a documentary. So I made, I don't know, maybe there was about 60 odd programs and I made about 10 of them. But the beauty of that is I was able to travel Wales with a proper historian,
brilliant. Yeah,
learn, from an expert about all these historical places. And the beauty of that was, as I mentioned earlier, all this time I was spending in these historical places,
yeah,
you'd learn the local ghost story, you'd learn about the
yeah,
local poltergeist. And we've got a great tradition of ghost stories in Wales. And I think all of that, we're like sponges, I guess. All of that has stayed in my head somehow. When it's that classic, isn't it? Write about what you know. Well, I've got all this information in my head, so what made sense was to use all these historical places and people that I've learned about and use them in my ghost novel then.
yeah, yeah. So you combined all your knowledge from the past and made it into this great novel. So congratulations, that's great. And how long did it take you to write the novel, Paul?
Well, it's 65,000 words.
Yeah, yeah,
It would have taken me about 6 weeks in lockdown.
okay,
Um, but in those days, we were bored, so I'd write that. I'd have my one daily walk a day. So on that daily walk, I'd discuss, um, the plot holes and the character development with my wife. I'd go
yeah,
back the next day. I'd work on it again. The beauty of lockdown is we literally didn't have anything to do. So
yeah,
if I wanted to write a pirate scene, I'd watch a pirate movie that night. If I wanted to write something about Plague London, I'd watch a documentary or I'd read up
mm,
I'd read up on Cornish pirates or whatever.
yeah,
So I cheated a little bit. I had the time to do a lot of research. I had the time
yeah,
to watch a lot of television to get all of this inspiration. So first draft, 6 weeks, probably, I don't know, 14, 15 drafts after that. I kind of skipped the structural edit because I had the confidence that I'd written a lot of television work.
yeah,
The line and copy edit, a lady in America did that for me. So I guess if you squished all of the time down, maybe it was 6 months from the
yeah,
point that I started to having a completed book.
yeah. Because the copy edited stuff takes a bit of time, doesn't it? Yeah,
Yeah, and that is really, she took the bull by the horns, and that's when you realize those guys know their stuff. And
yeah,
she took 5,000 words out. She was an expert on children's literature and middle grade. And that's when you look at it and you realize, wow, this wasn't ready to be published until this lady got hold of it and she sprinkled her magic on it. And then you suddenly look at it with fresh eyes and you realize you've got something good to put out on the market then.
great stuff. Yeah, because I was actually talking to somebody before who never takes anything out of his books, you know. So like he's put so much work in it. There's no way I'm taking a word out of that. Like so, I'd be on that same road. Did you ever kind of feel that you maybe a bit too much being taken over, or was that an issue for you, Paul?
Well, my main job, I edit in my main job, but
Yeah,
it's that classic, isn't it? That you don't read when you're judging your own work.
yeah,
There's a lot you don't see. You have to have somebody else's eyes
yeah,
to
yeah,
look at it. And even, rather than use proofreaders, I basically used all of my ARC readers
mm,
to spot all of the mistakes. And, the biggest value I saw was, I must have read that manuscript, I don't know, maybe 20, 30, 40 times. And I
yeah,
could have sworn there were normal
yeah,
mistakes in it.
yeah,
And then I read it out loud
mm,
rather than just read it in my head. And there's a different process when you read something out loud. And I had friends who read it out loud to their children. So yeah, it's that age-old thing, your brain starts skipping over the mistakes,
yeah, yeah,
and I guess when you're writing something for the first time, you've got that anxiety, but you need this body of people
definitely,
who
yeah,
all read it, and they're the biggest help. It's so valuable having ARC readers, having beta readers, and not ones that you trust either. It's always good to give it to somebody
yeah.
who's really straight to the point, who's honest with you, and you have to take that criticism on it. It's part of the process.
No, that's great. That's great advice for anybody that's listening. Thanks very much for that, Paul. Because you don't understand what I'm saying. Because some people will be saying, "Oh, put so much in it. I don't want to take much out of it," but it makes perfect sense what you're saying there. So thank you for that.
Mm.
Yeah, great. And as well as that, did you have a kind of a strategy when you're writing? Like, some people write a certain amount of words a day, or what way did you do it yourself for people who are listening?
I totally structured it.
Yeah,
So totally structured it. So I knew how many words I wanted. I knew how many chapters. Um, I structured it so I knew where all the pinch points were. I did all the character development. Um, and then I was able to write it. I know people will write freehand and brilliant.
yeah,
I think there's something in me that has to structure things before I begin.
yeah,
But what I did love was when I was writing a scene, and it's hard to explain it really. It's as if somebody's just taken over your hand and you're away and you're suddenly getting this rush of ideas.
mm,
Um, and that was the best bit for me. So, but I think I needed that initial structure. I've structured the next 5 books. I've started writing book 2. I'm finding it a little bit more difficult at the
yeah,
moment,
yeah,
but I don't really want to start writing until
mm,
I've got that structure down.
yeah,
Um, but of course, then when you start doing the second draft, the third draft, that's when you start getting these little magic moments where, oh, I'll put a little bit of foreshadowing there. Oh, I'll
yeah,
develop this character, so maybe they're related to this character. Um, the trouble with fantasy, the big thing with fantasy is you have to have a really good idea of what precedes your book historically.
mm,
So you have to almost start structuring prequels
yeah,
so
yeah,
everything works. So yeah, I really enjoyed that process. The most difficult process, I think, is when you start writing fantasy. Um, it still has to make sense. It still has to have laws. It still has to have rules. And I think when I started rereading my stuff, certain things weren't making sense. Or, it you've said it takes this long to go from here to there here, but then you've said it takes this long to go from here to there over there. So that was the most difficult thing is finding all these inconsistencies and then trying to work that out. But I think I was in a good place because I had put this solid structure
right, yeah,
down. And I think that probably came from drama courses and things that I've done. I've done a lot of creative writing courses, not necessarily author courses, more
yeah.
drama.
Okay, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but obviously that experience started to play a part as I was writing.
Yeah, no, that's great because Yeah, I understand exactly because it's good to have it kind of because even to have a start, a middle, and the ending. I was actually talking to kids in the school today and giving them that information. Just to have a proper good structure is very important. Thanks a lot for that, Paul. And
Hmm.
with a strong background in history and television, what can readers expect in the future from you, Paul?
Oh,
Yeah,
this is where I make a commitment, isn't
yeah,
it?
yeah,
Um, I've got a sort of five book structure,
yeah,
and like I said, because when you're writing fantasy, you have to have an idea of what comes before.
yeah,
You've almost structured your next few books, so in a way, hopefully that comes to fruition, and I've got some prequels. So I've created this world. It's a paranormal version of the past. The past being infinite means there's a lot of history that I can turn into ghosts. My next book, for instance, so this book starts in Wales, they travel into England.
mm,
So it's a lot of English history, ghost history. My next book, I'll go heavy on Welsh history, but I can travel into Scotland, I can travel into Ireland. I haven't decided yet whether I can travel internationally. So they can time travel within this ghost world.
yeah. Wow, yeah,
And of course, they go into the past. The past is infinite. So really, the world's my oyster in terms of how many books I want to write in terms of historical content, where it can go geographically and where it can go in time. In terms of character development, I don't know, but I think there's a series there. The hope is it's based around Halloween, so the hope is maybe I can bring one out every Halloween.
yeah, yeah,
Then that ticks the good little, this is marketing speak now, but that ticks the good little 100-day sweet spot,
yeah,
Halloween going into Christmas, which is traditionally when people buy a lot of books.
yeah.
So yeah, hopefully it'll begin as a little sideline.
Mm.
The end game, as we all hope, I think, is maybe a producer, TV, film,
Oh
games will
yeah,
see
definitely. Yeah,
potential in it. That's kind of the dream. Who knows? But I think the short-term plan is maybe a book every year in a series.
great stuff. No, the best of luck with that. That's brilliant. Yeah, because it's very like interesting, really, to go around different places, isn't it? To get all their background and to share that with your readers as well. So well done on that.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
the beauty of it is the
yeah,
research because
brilliant. Yeah, yeah,
I'll research a history story.
mm,
And when it came to writing this, I just thought, well, if nothing comes of it, I've learned something. I can use that in a television show.
right. Yeah, yeah,
For instance, I touched on it earlier, this is it's a story I tell in schools because people don't realize this story. So, and this is a character in my book. So, have you ever done a CPR course
yeah. I have. Yeah, yeah,
with your Annie dolls?
yeah, yeah.
Do you know where her face comes from?
No,
So this is an interesting story, and I was looking on the internet, and I couldn't really find anyone that had done it on TV. It's obviously been on TV before, but I couldn't find it. So
mm,
I ended up putting this character in my book, and then we ended up making a little item about it on Bargain Hunt 2 years ago.
yeah,
So in the 1880s, um, they find a dead girl's body in the Seine in Paris. They pull her out. Nobody recognizes her. I mean, in those days, they would place the body of somebody in the window of the morgue, so people would walk by and hopefully recognize an unidentified body. So
yeah,
nobody recognized this girl. As the story goes, somebody in the morgue falls in love with her face, and has a death mask made of her face, a plaster cast.
yeah,
So this is all very morbid.
yeah,
Anyway, this plaster cast of her face, so the story goes, becomes a muse for all the top artists in Paris and all of Europe in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And it hangs in all these galleries. And it also inspires a lot of poets. Fast forward to the 1950s, and St. John Ambulance are looking for somebody to develop a CPR doll. And they approach a Norwegian toy maker who's got the best selling doll at the time. And it's called the Annie doll. And by coincidence, this man had just had to rescue his son from drowning. So they approach him and he agrees to make this doll. And he's wondering, right, well, I need to give this doll a beautiful face because, these are views of the time. Men won't, it has to be a female face because when men are learning CPR, they'll be more inclined to kiss a female face.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
he remembers this death mask that was hanging on the wall of his in-laws' house. And that's the face that he used on the Annie doll, the CPR Annie doll. So this face on this CPR doll that saved millions of people from drowning is actually the face, supposedly, of a real girl who died from drowning in the 1880s in Paris.
Wow.
And I
Very
popped
cool.
her in my book. She's a ghost character in my book. But it's little stories like that that I stumble on,
Yeah, yeah,
um, which is well known. It's a well-known story within St. John Ambulance, and we filmed with
yeah.
St. John Ambulance Museum. But it's those little stories
Mm.
when you're writing, when you're researching, that you stumble on. And if it doesn't go in the book, doesn't matter. You've just found this really rich story that you're better off for knowing than if you hadn't done that research.
Yeah, that's a mad story. Thanks a lot for sharing me. It's mad that you never know where these things come from. Wow. Yeah,
If you
yeah,
type if you, ty- if
yeah,
you type in bargain hunt and
yeah,
CPR Annie, you'll
yeah,
find the item that we uh,
yeah,
we shot online.
yeah. I must tell the kids about that. Yeah, great
Although the
stuff.
kids, the kids in the schools love it because
Yeah,
it's a
yeah,
slightly morbid,
yeah,
kind of weird story,
yeah,
which
yeah,
has a kind of happy ending at the end.
yeah, yeah. Very good. Um, I was going to ask you as well later on. What inspired you to create Joni Jones and the Ghost Train?
Um, all right, this is the weird question I can't really answer, and I think it's to do with lockdown, and I think our brains have sort of shut a lot of stuff away from that time. So
Yeah,
I can't really recall having a moment where I thought I'm going to write middle grade.
okay.
I can't really recall the moment where I thought this is the story I'm going to write because I had all sorts of stories going around my head. The only thing I can remember is I wanted a ghost story. I wanted something like the Goonies where, or maybe a throwback to the famous five, where there's a mystery and they have to find something out.
Yeah,
But I think what probably led me to middle grade is I wanted them to be the age group where they didn't have tech. And I
yeah,
think the moment they had tech,
mm,
if you're standing in a creepy woods and you're, ooh, I wonder what used to be here. When the
yeah,
minute they had tech, the
mm,
whole thing falls down. I
yeah,
needed them to go to the local library, go through books, find out. And I think they had to be about 11 years old for that whole mystery
mm,
happen.
yeah.
And it's kind of sad these days because that element of mystery is gone, really.
Definitely, yeah,
And I think
yeah,
that's probably what made me make them 11 years old and write middle grade.
mm,
But also, when I've read other books or other films, um, there's certain films like I don't know, Terminator or RoboCop that stand the test of time. But most films or books that have tech in them don't stand the test of time.
hmm,
So in this genre, they were traveling into history, into a different realm. So the
yeah,
minute they're in that world, tech doesn't exist anyway, so it doesn't matter. But from the offset, they needed to live in a world where they still had this element of mystery. And that's the only thing I can think is what led me to writing for that age group in particular.
yeah. It makes a lot of sense. No, yeah, it really does. Because like I'd be the same as you, like trying to get kids away from the screens if I can. So that's
Yeah, I
great.
mean, I mean, no, my,
Yeah,
my favorite kind of genre, my favorite film is Jaws, and The
yeah,
Thing.
I'm with you.
My
Yeah,
favorite kind of genre is that kind of, alien or that kind of thing where there's a group of people on their own being attacked by something. Um, I had an idea like that bubbling around, but something at the time made me go down this route, and I'm not too sure what, to be fair.
no, I'd say you're glad you did because it's a great idea. Like, well done to you. And I wish you all the success going forward, everything you do, Paul. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. It's been a blast. Thank you. It's been
Yeah,
really nice
thank you.
speaking.
Yeah, great. So I wish you all the success, and make sure you share all your links, and I'll put them on the show notes for people to check out as well.
Will do. Thank you very
Yeah,
much. So I can't remember what they are altogether. It's at Ghost Train Story or at Ghost Train Book
yeah,
on TikTok and Instagram
right.
um,
Yeah,
and X, I imagine.
right. Sure. We'll keep in touch anyway, and thanks everyone for tuning in to today's episode with Paul Leyshon. Great talking to Paul, and once again, best of luck with everything you do. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for watching. Perfect.
Hello everyone, Mark here. Thank you for watching another episode of my Authors Tuesday podcast. I recently published a book of children's stories called The Adventures of Larry Lamppost and Friends. The book began life as bedtime stories I wrote for my own children. If you'd like to purchase my book, follow the link in the description box below. By buying my book, you are also supporting my podcast series for authors, which is giving a voice to writers in Ireland and across the world.